I shall gladly repay you on Tuesday for a hamburger today. J. Wellington Wimpy. Hamburger, hamburger, king of all foods. Nothing is better when you're in the mood. Ah, my mouth waters, my tongue hangs out for a luscious, juicy hamburger.
Are you ready to make the most of the only life you have? To make smart money choices focused on achieving what you care about most? Here to help you balance living well today without sacrificing your tomorrow is the Retirement Answer Man, Roger Whitney.
Thanks, Emma. I'll come down and get it in a minute. I can't believe it. Another package from Amazon. Holy cow, my wife thinks I have an addiction. You know, shopping used to be a lot more difficult. Remember back in the day, because you and I are old enough to remember back in the day, when if you needed a pair of jeans or a book, you would what? Get in the car, drive to the mall, walk around, shop after shop, browse, try to find the book that made sense for you. Maybe you didn't know what kind of book you wanted, or a friend told you about a book and you had to go hunt it down. That could take, weeks before you could get to the mall. And then when you bought it, you actually had to write a check for it. So you had to make sure you had your checkbook. The time it took to shop back in the day, back when you and I were younger, it was an ordeal. You had to go do something. So when you had that momentary, man, it would be cool to have that, you had to plan out, which gave you a lot of time to realize, maybe I don't really want that. Or maybe I want something else. Maybe I don't need anything at all. Or maybe you just forgot about it and never went and got that cool thing that you heard about. Well, how is shopping today? Think about how shopping is today. What is it? Hey, Roger, I heard of a good book. Click. Same day delivery to my door. I know Amazon can do it because I've tested them, because we happen to live in an area where they do same day delivery. Hey, Roger, I saw this great new tech tool that you should have. Click. It comes right to my door, maybe same day. Instant gratification. As soon as I hear of something that might be of interest to me, oh, I got to have that. Click. It goes right to my door. That is how shopping is today, and it's going to get worse and worse, or better and better, depending on your point of view on it. Better in the sense that it's convenient, right? It just happens very quickly, and you are able to get something that you think that you want. I won't call it a need, very quickly. But bad because the world of commerce is rapidly decreasing the friction necessary to act on that purchase decision. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in the Hot Topic segment. Plus, we're going to answer listener questions right after this disclaimer. That's right. It's time for that all-important disclaimer, and that is, don't take advice from me on the show. I am a fiduciary to clients that I work with and manage money for. I'm not a fiduciary to you. I don't know anything about you, so take this as helpful hints and education. And before you make any decisions, talk to your legal advisor, your tax advisor, or your financial advisor, because that's just common sense. Hey, if we can be honest here, I think traditional retirement planning is broken. I mean, it worked great for your parents, but it doesn't work as good for you because you're going to live longer and spend a lot more money and likely don't have a pension. So it doesn't really give you the clarity and confidence to charge into retirement and create that life that you want. If you want to have a great retirement, I think you're going to need a new, more modern method. And to help you on that journey, I created a 3-video series called the 5-Minute Retirement Makeover, where we talk about what's wrong with traditional retirement planning. And I show you a more modern, agile way to start having the right little conversations so you can work towards the retirement you want. So if you want to check it out, go to 5minuteretirementmakeover.com. That's 5minuteretirementmakeover.com. Now let's talk about that spending stuff. Remember after the 2008-2009 what they call it, the Great Recession, the economic near collapse, when everybody was over levered. They had too much mortgage debt. They had too much car debt, too much credit card debt. A lot of us thought we learned our lessons. We just, we had this great deleveraging, getting rid of debt on our balance sheet. Well, guess what? In the news today, according to thestreet.com, credit card debt has reached just over $1 trillion. This is well above the previous record about a decade ago in 2007. So we had $1 trillion in credit card debt. So we had a big deleveraging of credit card debt after the 2007, 2008 debacle. Now we've just ran right back up with over $1 trillion in credit card debt in the U.S. Now, in addition to that, we also have $1.2 trillion in auto debt. That's 13% above the previous record. Now, what's interesting in that is looking at the same timelines, according to the article I was reading, the total number of cars and trucks on the road is only up 1.5% from that same date. So we are over $1 trillion in credit card debt, over $1.2 trillion in auto debt. We're not even talking about mortgages here. So when you look at total household debt, including mortgage, we're at levels just a hair under the peak in 2008. Well, so much for the lessons learned from the Great Recession, I guess. Now, I'm already seeing articles saying, this is the sign that we're about to have that next big bubble burst. I am not here to make that prediction. If you've listened to the show long enough, I don't make predictions. I just try to make smart decisions and help you make smart decisions with your money like I do with clients' money. So the question is, what does this mean for you and I? Well, number one, obviously, we don't want to be one of those. My guess is that you guys probably aren't, because you're just listening to financial shows, so you're probably a little bit more prudent than most. So you definitely don't want to be one of those that is over-levered on their balance sheet and has too much debt. I think the other thing that it means for us, and this goes to the Wimpy quote, is lifestyle choices are crucial. And I've seen that in managing investments and planning for clients hundreds of times. When you're working through what's possible in retirement, one of the biggest levers is how much money is needed to pay for those needs, wants, and wishes. What I've noticed over the years is that the wants and wishes you can toggle and have flexibility on. One thing I've noticed is there's a big disconnect with people on what is defined as a need in what is defined as a want. So if we think of basic needs, we're talking what? Housing, utilities, groceries, healthcare, a little bit of spending around money. Those are needs, right? We need to have a house. We need to have, or housing, I should say. We need to have food to eat. We need to have our lights on and our heat or our air conditioning. We need transportation of some sort. Those are the basic needs. Travel, entertainment, nicer cars, all those things really are wants after a very low degree, but we've grown into a society where a lot of things that are technically wants, we know they're an absolute need. Where that line is for you makes a huge difference. And I've noticed where when the needs, the basic needs to have a good life are reasonable, it goes a long way to making the whole retirement picture work. So that's the first thing, is really define for yourself, what is the difference between a need and a want? And I struggle with this on my own because there's easy, I need that. No, you want that. I work on that on myself. Secondly, it's more important than ever to build friction in your transactions, your ability to do transactions. When the entire economy, consumer economy, is conspiring against you to take away all the friction. And here's an example. I'm not proud of this. This was maybe 4 years ago. So I am sitting at a corporate board meeting. I'm taking notes on my iPad, and this email pops up for this course that I had been interested in, but had decided not to do. And it was that last minute, get in, save this much money type of email. You probably have gotten those for something. Well, because I was distracted, I literally was able to process and enroll in the course, give them my credit card, because my credit card was saved in my computer while I was in the board meeting, and basically spent like $8,000 that I did not intend to do. I'm not proud of this. I'm just sharing with you as an example. And then went back to board business. But literally, from the time I got the email to the whim, oh yeah, I need that. I really do want to do that. And there's a bargain. I got to take it. It was probably 30 seconds, literally. Fast forward, I finished my board work. I'm flying home. As I'm driving home, this was actually the same day. As I'm driving home from the airport, I'm like, dude, what did you just do? Literally, I pulled over on the side of the highway and undid the transaction. Sent an email to the support saying, no, I'm out. Give me my refund. It was a big lesson because the friction for really substantial transactions, it's gone. So you need to create some friction for yourself, regardless of how disciplined you are, because if you don't, you're human, and marketers are experts. I'm not saying that lightly. They are experts, and they have it down to a science on how to tweak you and make you feel incomplete and touch the emotional wiring that is in all of us to prompt us to do something. It's gotten more scientific than ever before. So you're going to have to create some friction. So what kind of friction can you create? One is you can have a rule of spending over X amount of dollars. You talk to your spouse or you talk to a friend, or you give yourself a waiting period. The friction that I've created is I have my checking account. My wife and I, we have our checking account, and all my income goes into a different account. So that checking account, I keep really lean, and that's the only money we have to spend. So it makes me feel like I don't have access to funds, because if I have that credit card in my hand, that is easy, frictionless transactions. That is getting the hamburger today. Oh yeah, I'll pay you back on Tuesday. And you know what happens? You keep buying hamburgers and you forget to pay back. So you're going to have to create some friction for yourself. And then lastly, and this is another observation from working with just hundreds of clients on this retirement equation and how to manage assets and how to make it all work, is value experiences, not things. We are taught now to value things, and marketers know how to say we're incomplete without things. But the happiest clients that I see are the ones that are focused on experiences, whether that's a hobby, whether that's church, whether that's travel. Travel could be done in a lot less expensive way than we always think about. It doesn't mean you can't have nice things or do nice things, but focus on the experience part of it rather than the purchasing part of it. So it's a very difficult thing for all of us to deal with, but it can be one of the most, well, it is, I think, the most important lever you can pull to work towards a great retirement and not be included in this couple $1 trillion debt craziness that we see that is normal. Okay, now let's get to some good listener questions. Hey, welcome to the Practical Planning segment. Today we got some great listener questions, and I'm excited because it's the listener asking the question. Did you realize you could do that? If you have a question you would like answered directly to you, plus possibly on the show, go to rogerwhitney.com, click on Ask a Question, and you can either write your question in, which is what a lot of people do, but if you want to have your voice on here, click on Start Recording. There's a little widget right up top, and you can actually record from your mobile phone or your computer and ask your question. It'll come to me, and then maybe we'll get you on the show. So we have a few questions today from listeners that did just that. So let's start with Jim.
Hi, Roger. My name's Jim. My wife, Lisa, and I just turned 50 this year, and I have two pensions, one from a previous job and one I'm working on now. I'm a teacher in North Carolina and have a small 401k with the state that they just started for teachers. I transferred money from another savings plan in there, another IRA, about $40,000. And my wife really has never saved for retirement. So my current plan is to hit the mortgage hard and have that paid off within 2 years. The house is worth about $200,000, and then transfer that effort into maxing out that 401k. I just kind of wondered, am I doing the right thing, or should that be in reverse, or maybe split down the middle more? I've run the numbers, and really it looks to me like getting the mortgage out of the way sooner saves a whole lot in interest and protects us more if something were to happen with my job. So thanks, Roger, for any advice. Love your podcast. Keep up the good work.
Well, thanks for that question, Jim. That's a great question, by the way. So you're age 50, you have 2 pensions. You've saved some for retirement. You said your wife didn't have much. And your plan is, at age 50, to hit that mortgage hard and pay it down in 2 years, which is impressive. That tells me you probably have a lot of financial discipline. And then once you have that mortgage paid off, say at age 52, 53, then transfer all of your saving efforts to your 401k. And my guess is that between you and your wife, you could probably hammer that pretty hard in the event you didn't have any disruption in your income. And you want to know, is that the right thing to do, or should you split it down the middle? So obviously I can't give you specific advice, but here are some thoughts to consider as you're making this decision. Number one is this going to be your forever home? Is this the house that you plan on living in? If it is, then I would lean towards doing the plan that you're doing, which is get this thing paid off, save all that interest expense that you're talking about, and then really start to hammer away your 401k. So that's one thing. The longer timeline you're going to be in this house, in my mind, better to have it paid off. Now, a lot would argue that because interest rates are so low that you don't pay it off quickly because you can earn more in other things. And I get that logic from a math standpoint. But like you said, if you had a disruption in your work and everything else, from a cash flow perspective, not paying off that mortgage could really put you in a bind in the event that you had something going on from a work perspective and income perspective. And that's important. And that's something that just simply the math equation on where your best return is usually doesn't take into account. So I lean towards what you're considering doing there. The second consideration, I think, is do you have ample cash reserves in after-tax money? So do you have an emergency fund that's filled up to where you feel comfortable? Do you have money for upcoming extra expenses that, something within the next 12 to 18 months? You want to make sure you have those things taken care of first, because all those monies that you throw towards your mortgage, you really don't get to access again, other than maybe through a home equity loan or sale of the house. So I would always make sure that you have your emergency fund and a separate fund for those extraordinary expenses. That could be an improvement, that could be a new car, that could be a trip that you and your wife are going to go on, because you don't want to have to get yourself in a cash bind. And if you don't have any extraordinary expenses right now, just make sure you monitor that through little conversations, because that will help you a lot. Third, I assuming you have no bad debt in terms of car loans or credit card loans. You're not part of that $1 trillion or $2 trillion. The last thing I would suggest that you consider is if there is some type of match in the 401k, if the company or the school district matches some portion of it, to go ahead and contribute enough to get the maximum match. That way you're getting free money. Where this doesn't work as a whole is once you have the mortgage paid off, if you're actually slow, you don't fulfill that commitment of hammering the mortgage and then starting to hammer 401k savings. If you get undisciplined or you get sidetracked in some way, then that's where this doesn't work. That's one thing that nice about 401ks, Jim, is that it's forced savings that once it starts, you never see it. It takes that friction away. So it can really accumulate over time. A lot of us will get into mind tricks of, okay, I'm going to pay this off and then I'll start saving. And then they never do. So that is one thing to be really careful of if you make the decision to hammer the mortgage first. Jim, thank you for leaving a voice message. Thank you for asking a question. I hope that's some help. If you have any other questions, just shoot me an email. Now, our next question comes from David. Now, this one is not a voice question, but we included Dave anyway because it's a good question and it's a topic I'm dealing with right at the moment. And that is, he simply asked, what are the pros and cons of rolling over a 401k to a IRA upon retirement versus keeping the money in the 401k? Well, it's a good question, David. And you say upon retirement. I'll try to answer it from that perspective, but I want to deal with this. Do I roll it over to an IRA or do I not? Just in general. So I'll try to focus on upon retirement. Let's look at what your options are. Okay. Option number one are keep it in the old 401k, right? Option number two is if you're continuing to work, which you're not, it sounds like, roll it into the new 401k. Option three is to roll it to an IRA, which is your question. And option four is to cash it out, which I'm guessing you're not wanting to do. So those are the options. You have those four options, three for you, David, if you're not working at all. So what are some of the considerations with that? Well, first of all, you know that from a regulatory standpoint, the SEC and FINRA on the brokerage side and the SEC on the advisory side, this is a big question. This is a big issue right now, or a hot button for them. From an audit perspective, is when an advisor advises on whether a 401k should be rolled over or not, that is having to be documented more than ever before. Because bluntly, what happened was, or has been happening, is it's just a knee-jerk, roll it over to an IRA, mainly because that is money that can be managed without ample justification that it's in the client's best interest. So this is a hot button question. So it's a great question to ask, David. So what are some of the things to consider on whether you keep it in your old 401k or you move that into an IRA? So the first consideration are fees. 401ks can benefit from the aggregation of so many individuals investing that a lot of times they can access mutual fund selections with lower fees, whether it's through an institutional share, which has lower internal costs. So that you want to understand what the fees are on the investment selections and in the plan of the 401k, and then compare them to what you have in terms of options, either on your own as a self-directed individual or through the advisor that you might work with. So fees are important, right? Because fees, I always think of fees as, and we're going to do a show on fees and advisors, is fees are okay if you're getting value over and above the fees that you're paying, right? It's, it only becomes an issue when there's not definable value being added by some way. So number one consideration is fees. What are the fees in the plan relative to your options? There are 401ks that have very efficient, very low fee options. There are a lot of 401ks, and it's getting less this way, that have not very low fees, mainly because of how they were built up and it's been around for decades. So you really do want to pay attention to the fees that you're paying because that goes right to your bottom line in terms of returns. The second consideration is investment selection. And this has gotten better as ERISA has been implemented more robustly in what investment options do you have? Now, that can mean how broad the investment options are. Do you have access to all the asset classes that you need to be able to build a very well globally diversified portfolio? So that's number one. Do you have enough options to build a portfolio that gets you diversified to the level that you need to be? So that's number one. And number two is, on the investment selection end, do you have good options in all of those asset classes? Maybe you have a broad selection of choices with mutual funds and international equities and emerging markets and bonds, high yield bonds, U.S. stocks, all over the place. But maybe they're all very performing funds or investments relative to what you might be able to do on your own. So number one is, do you have a robust selection of options that cover all of the asset classes to build a diversified portfolio? And number two, are they good options from a performance and fee standpoint relative to what you can do on your own? So those are two fairly high bars that you're going to want to consider. If they are, then that might lean to keeping there. The third option is, do you have access within the 401k to a really attractive cash account option? So what do I mean by that? So stable value funds are something that are a little unique to 401ks. Not all 401ks have them, but a stable value fund is like a savings account, like a money market, but generally yield a lot higher than anything you could get on your own. As an example, not that long ago, I was working with a client and we were making this decision on where do we move assets on the balance sheet. And looking at the 401k, they had access to a stable value fund that had a yield. I think it was like 2.25%. I forget the exact number, which is a very attractive yield where it's like a savings account, meaning that by design, it's not supposed to go up or down. It's just dollar in, dollar out. Well, if you can get 2.25% in a stable value fund, and you're implementing an asset allocation, given where interest rates are, that can be really attractive. If we look at the index that most bond managers compare themselves against, the Barclays Aggregate Bond Index, currently it has a dividend yield of 2.42%. So almost equivalent in this case to the stable value fund that we were looking at as an option for this particular person. The decision was, okay, we can get about 2.25% in a stable value fund and have no price risk, relatively speaking, or we can implement all of our bond allocation to something that mimics the Barclays U.S. Aggregate Bond Index, get 2.42% roughly in yield, but have price risk because it's investing in longer term bonds. It has a duration, meaning the average maturity of the bonds of 5.7 years. So if interest rates go up from here, if rules play out as they do, then the Lehman Bond Index would go down because the price of bonds go down typically as interest rates go up. So the question was, okay, I can get 2.25% here with no price risk, or I can get 2.4% here in yield with a lot of price risk if I believe interest rates are going to go up. So those stable value funds can be good options in helping you potentially lower your risk level and implement a little bit more elegantly than just simply throwing it into an allocation. So stable value funds could be a good reason to lean towards keeping it in a 401k. The fourth reason is asset protection. So 401ks are governed by ERISA, which is a federal statute, and they have fairly robust asset protection on a federal level, meaning if you get sued, someone can't go raid it as easily. If you move monies to an IRA, they have asset protection, but it's on a state-by-state basis. Some of them are just as robust, some of them aren't, so that might be a consideration. The fifth consideration is if you have a substantial amount of company stock that has been accumulated in that 401k, you may have the opportunity to do something called net unrealized appreciation. And we've talked about that on the show. That's a rare thing that people have, which just allows you to potentially save a lot of money on taxes by how you take that company stock out of the 401k. If you move that to an IRA, you lose the opportunity to do something like net unrealized appreciation. The next option, I think it's number 7, is if you are laid off or you take early retirement, and it has to be age 55 or older, within a 401k, you can access that money without a penalty prior to 59 and a half. So, David, if you've retired and you are under 59 and a half, leaving it in a 401k will give you more options. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily that you exercise the option immediately. You know, let's say you're 55 and a half and you retired, but you're not planning on taking any money out of the 401k. So you say, I'm not going to do that. So you just roll it to an IRA. But what about 2 years later when you're 57 and you realize, oh, I might need some money? Well, as soon as you roll that to an IRA, that option goes away. Even if you don't think you're going to need to do it immediately, that might lean you towards keeping it in the 401k. So hopefully, David, that gave you some considerations and things to think about. The idea on it all is how do you position yourself best? And that is a much broader equation than just simply fees and investment selection. Is what will serve you best on this retirement journey. So hopefully that helped you out, David. Now, our last question of the day is from Scott, and it is an audio question.
Hi, Roger. My name is Scott, and I have a question about real estate equity. There seems to be a wide range of opinions out there in the financial planner camp about whether or not to include home equity, either all of it or in part, in the asset pool for tapping living expenses in retirement if needed. And by home equity, I mean in the primary residence as opposed to a second home or a rental property. So if my goal is to go out with a minimal net worth, what are your thoughts on this topic?
Hey, Scott, that's a great question. So basically you're wondering, okay, I have this house. I have equity in the house. Let's assume it's paid off, like Jim was talking about. Do I include that in the pool for providing for my retirement? Especially if my goal is to sort of die broke or spend my last dollar on my deathbed. It's a great question. So first, let's talk about assets. When you're looking at your net worth statement, at least when I look at net worth statements and I'm working with clients, I distinguish between use assets, which are assets that you are using. You're getting a return more from your use of it than some financial return. So a house might be considered that way in that you need to have housing, and it's an asset that maybe you have $200,000 tied up in your house and it's paid off. Well, that asset isn't producing returns for you necessarily. I mean, there might be some appreciation, but it is giving you the benefit of having housing, right? As compared to what is a productive asset. So a productive asset would be rental real estate property. It would be your 401k. It would be your business, things that are actually producing some type of return, either through appreciation, dividends, or interest. So I like to divide the net worth statement or have those things designated. That's one reason why I'm not big into having cars and personal property on a net worth statement, because technically they should be there, but they're use assets. You're always going to have a car for the most part. Maybe that'll change. And your personal property, whatever you put a value on it, it's probably pennies on the dollar if you ever actually had to liquidate it. So when we come down to the house, let's assume here, Scott, that it's a $200,000 house that's paid off. Similar to Jim above. Do you include that in how you're going to plan for retirement? When I'm working with clients and we're really digging into their balance sheet to figure out how to make retirement work, first off, everything is on the table. So yes, you include it, but you have to, if this is for your forever home, you may not include it in the base plan, but it can create some interesting what-if scenarios that you can experiment with to see how it might change the entire retirement equation. So what do I mean by that? Well, what are some ways that you could tap, say, home equity? Well, one is the marketed product is the reverse mortgage of some type, where you start to access that to receive monthly payments based off of your home equity. That is a option. Is it the best one? I don't know. I've never done one and used one with a client, but it is a option. Another way to tap that home equity that you could experiment with is, well, what if I downsize at some point and access the difference? So I take all my equity. Let's use that $200,000 again. What if I sell my $200,000 house and buy a $100,000 house, and now I have the extra $100,000 in equity that can become a productive asset to start contributing towards my retirement? There are some nuanced ways to do this. I've done this where, hey, we really love our house, so we figured out how to extend the time in that house, because I think this house was, a $1 million+ house. They really love this house, but they knew that at some point it was going to be too big and too much maintenance, but they wanted to enjoy it for a period in retirement. So we worked through, okay, how long could we realistically keep that house and enjoy it, with the understanding that at some point the client downsized, accessed a good portion of that equity that could become a productive asset, and then get that money going to work. And then also factor in, hey, now we have less upkeep, we have less taxes, factoring that into the plan as well. So there are some ways of doing that. And the key is you just have to experiment with it. And each situation is different. But one option would be to downsize and then access the difference and turn that into a productive asset. Another way that you could noodle on it and figure out whether this makes sense is to sell that house, sell that $200,000 house, and then just rent with the idea of, hey, I want to die with nothing. I have to have housing. What would it look like if I just did this? A scenario I can think of there is you sell the $200,000 house, you put the money aside, you rent something really small because you want to travel all the time. That could be an option. The key is you just have to play it out to see how does this affect the entire picture. And then another way that you could include this home equity in your productive resources, and I've done this in planning, is maybe you have the desire that, hey, I love my house. I'm going to stay in my house, even though it's paid off. But at some point, I'm selling it and I'm going to buy lifetime housing through one of the many facilities where you basically have, from the moment you enter to grave, no care, senior housing. And then as you get older and need more services, they're already built in there. There are a number of facilities that you just pay a one-time plus some monthly, and you're basically set for life in terms of your housing and your care needs as you progress or potentially progress through whatever medical needs you need and elder care that you might need. So, Scott, I would include it on your balance sheet. And if the intent is to always live in your house, start there, but then start to plan some different scenarios to see if it can help the situation. Because maybe you value retiring earlier than staying in that house long term. You got to test that out. Maybe you value traveling more. Maybe accessing some of that equity could buy you more travel while you're younger. So yeah, I would include it, but not initially. But you want to include it when you're doing what ifs, because the whole idea is you're trying to design a great life and you got to put everything on the table. So hopefully that helps.
On your marks, get set.
Hey, welcome to the Smart Sprint segment where we set a 7-day challenge to take a little baby step to create a better financial life and a better retirement. So in the next 7 days, I want you to come up with one way you can increase some friction in your commerce, your life of commerce. Maybe it's resigning from Amazon Prime. It could be simply taking your card off of your computer so it can't autofill all your credit card information. So you actually have to go to your wallet or your purse to buy something. But in the next 7 days, I want you to find one thing that you can do to create a little bit of friction to slow down that purchasing process. Hey, welcome to the Happy Lab. So I'm listening to the audiobook Steve Jobs by Walter Isaacson. It's a huge book, very well narrated by the gentleman on the audiobook. I forget his name. And I'm an Apple fanatic. Many of you know that. But I was a little reluctant to read this because Steve was sort of a jerk. I mean, very visionary. But my understanding was he was not very happy, it seemed, a lot of times. Well, towards the end of the book, they talk about the commencement speech that he gave at Stanford. And he told 3 stories. And this is when he was starting to have health issues. So he's a little bit more raw than he was in his younger life. But one of the stories, I just want to read a short passage of it and talk about it. Remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make the big choices in life. Because almost everything, all external expectations, all pride, all fear of embarrassment or failure, these things just fall away in the face of death, leaving only what is truly important. Remembering that you are going to die is the best way to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. You are already naked. There is no reason not to follow your heart. Now that sounds a little depressing, but I love it. It's inspiring. We're all going to leave this world. There's no reason to leave anything on the table. That's why we start with an ideal retirement. That's why we try to be as intentional as possible on how we live our life, on how we invest our assets, and how we make little decisions. Because we don't want to wake up and say, man, I didn't follow my heart because I was living by other people's expectations. I think if we can embrace that, we're going to live a lot happier life. And that's a lot of what this show's about. So go be happy. Well, thanks for joining me on the show today. Now, if you are looking for help in creating a roadmap towards retirement and possibly managing your assets and help you walking that journey, I am currently accepting clients. Just go to rogerwhitney.com, click on Work with Roger, and we can set up a time to have a quick chat to see if it's right for you. Thank you so much for joining me on today's show.
We appreciate you joining us today for this episode of Retirement Answer Man. Be sure to visit rogerwhitney.com/answers to access the Retirement Answer Library with over 30 checklists to help you make the most of the only life you have. Remember, you have more power than you realize to create an amazing life starting today with Retirement Answer Man. The opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. Have a wonderful day.